What happens when Hollywood's most respected actor gets disrespected on live television? In just 35 seconds, what started as a simple question turned into the most explosive meltdown in late-night history, ending with Samuel L. Jackson storming off the set after telling Stephen Colbert exactly what he thought of him. Before we dive into this absolute train wreck, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the moments they don't want you to see, and the confrontations that shake the entertainment industry to its core. Hit that subscribe button right now. Last night on The Late Show, something happened that nobody saw coming. Samuel L. Jackson walked onto that stage expecting a normal conversation about his new movie, but what he got instead was something completely different. And by the end of it, Stephen Colbert was left sitting alone at his desk, watching one of the biggest stars in Hollywood walk away from him. The show started like it always does. The band played, the audience cheered, and Stephen Colbert came out with his usual big smile. He did his monologue, made some jokes about politics, and then announced his guest for the evening. When he said Samuel L. Jackson's name, the crowd went absolutely wild. People love Samuel L. Jackson. He's been in over 150 movies. He's cool, he's funny, and he doesn't take crap from anyone. Jackson walked out wearing a really nice purple suit, waving to the audience. Everyone was clapping and cheering. He sat down in the guest chair, and Colbert immediately started talking. But here's where things get interesting. Right from the very beginning, you could feel something was off. Colbert leaned back in his chair and said, "So Sam, thanks for being here tonight." He called him Sam, not Samuel, not Mr. Jackson, just Sam. Jackson's smile got a little smaller, but he stayed cool. He nodded and said, "Happy to be here, Stephen." Then Colbert jumped right into his first question without even asking about the movie. He said, "So I gotta ask you about something. There's been a lot of talk online about some of your recent comments regarding method acting. You said it was basically nonsense. Don't you think that's a bit harsh? I mean, some of the greatest performances in cinema history came from method actors." Jackson shifted in his seat. You could see his jaw tighten just a little bit. He said, "Well, what I actually said was that some actors hide behind method acting as an excuse to be difficult on set. There's a difference between doing your job well and making everyone around you miserable because you think you're Daniel Day-Lewis." The audience laughed at that, but Colbert didn't laugh. He just kept pushing. "But doesn't that diminish the craft? I mean, shouldn't we celebrate actors who fully commit to their roles, even if it makes things harder for everyone else?" Jackson looked at him for a second, and you could tell he was already getting annoyed. He said, "Stephen, I've been doing this for over 40 years. I've worked with every kind of actor you can imagine. And I can tell you right now, the best actors I've ever worked with didn't need to stay in character between takes to do great work. They showed up, they did their job professionally, and they went home. That's what professionals do." Colbert smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was that smile people do when they think they're smarter than you. He said, "Okay, but Sam, don't you think maybe you're just from a different generation? Like maybe you don't understand the modern approach to acting?" That's when you could see Jackson's whole body language change. He sat up straighter, and his voice got a little harder. "Different generation? Man, I'm still getting more work than half the actors you're talking about. I just finished 3 movies this year. Don't talk to me about generations." The audience got really quiet. You know that feeling when you're watching something and you can tell it's about to go wrong? That's what this felt like. But Colbert didn't stop. Instead, he actually kept going, like he didn't notice how upset Jackson was getting. Colbert said, "I'm just saying, there are younger actors now who are really pushing boundaries. They're taking risks that maybe your generation didn't take." Jackson stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, "My generation? Stephen, my generation created the boundaries that these kids are supposedly pushing. We were out there making movies that actually meant something while dealing with racism, typecasting, and studios that didn't want to give us a chance. Don't sit there and tell me about pushing boundaries." His voice had gotten louder, and now people in the audience were looking at each other nervously. Colbert tried to laugh it off. He said, Okay, I didn't mean to upset you. Let's talk about your new movie." But Jackson wasn't ready to move on. He said, "No, hold on. You brought this up, so let's talk about it. You invited me here, and instead of asking me about my work, you're basically telling me I'm old and out of touch. That's what you're doing right now." Colbert's face got a little red. He said, "That's not what I'm saying at all, Sam. I'm just trying to have an interesting conversation. It's Samuel, Jackson said. His voice was sharp now, not friendly anymore. It's Samuel L. Jackson, not Sam. You don't know me like that. The audience gasped. Some people laughed nervously, but most people just sat there in shock. You could feel the tension in that room through the television screen. Colbert looked genuinely surprised, like he didn't expect Jackson to call him out like that. Colbert tried to recover. He said, I apologize, Samuel. I didn't mean any disrespect. Jackson nodded slowly, but you could tell he didn't really believe it. He said, all right then. You wanted to talk about my new movie? Let's talk about it. But Colbert's ego was clearly hurt, because instead of just moving on and letting it go, he decided to make things worse. So much worse. He said, before we get to that, I actually want to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned racism and typecasting. Don't you think that sometimes actors, and I'm not saying you specifically, but sometimes actors use those issues as excuses when maybe they're just not getting roles because of other reasons? The entire audience went silent, like completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Jackson's eyes got wide, and he leaned forward in his chair. What did you just say to me? Jackson said, and his voice was low and dangerous. Colbert realized he had messed up, but instead of apologizing right away, he tried to explain himself. I'm just saying that the industry has changed a lot, and maybe some of the barriers that existed before aren't as prevalent now, and sometimes people hold on to old grievances instead of adapting to the new reality. Jackson stood up, not quickly, but slowly, deliberately. He buttoned his suit jacket and looked down at Colbert. Let me tell you something, Stephen. I've been in this business since before you even knew what a television camera was. I've fought for every single role I've ever gotten. I've dealt with directors who didn't want to cast me because of the color of my skin. I've dealt with studios who thought I couldn't open a movie, and I proved every single one of them wrong. Colbert tried to interrupt. Samuel, I think you're misunderstanding. I'm not done talking, Jackson said, and his voice boomed through the studio. You invited me here tonight, and you've done nothing but disrespect me since I sat down. You called me by the wrong name. You told me I'm out of touch. You suggested I'm using racism as an excuse. And you know what the worst part is? You're doing it with that smug smile on your face like you think you're clever. The audience was completely frozen. Some people looked like they wanted to clap but didn't know if they should. Colbert's face had gone from red to almost white. He said, I really think you're taking this the wrong way. I'm just trying to have a provocative conversation. Jackson laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you do when you can't believe what you're hearing. Provocative? Man, you're just being disrespectful. There's a difference. You can have a tough conversation without being condescending. You can ask hard questions without being insulting. But you chose to do it this way. And now you're surprised that I'm calling you out on it. One of the producers off stage tried to signal for a commercial break, but Jackson saw it and shook his head. No, we're not going to commercial. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now. Colbert shifted in his seat uncomfortably. He said, Look, Samuel, I apologize if I've offended you. That genuinely was not my intention. Your intention doesn't matter, Jackson said. What matters is what you actually said. And what you said was offensive. You sat there and basically told me that racism isn't a real issue anymore, that I should just get over it. You know how insulting that is? You know how many young black actors are watching this show right now, seeing you dismiss their struggles? Colbert tried again. I wasn't dismissing anything. I was just saying that things have improved. Things have improved? Jackson's voice got even louder. Man, just last year I had a studio executive tell me I was too urban for a role. Too urban? You know what that means? It means too black. And you're sitting here telling me that's not a real problem anymore? The audience started murmuring. Some people were nodding along with Jackson. Others looked uncomfortable. Colbert looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. He said, I didn't know that happened to you. I'm sorry that happened. You're missing the point, Jackson said. It's not about what happened to me. It's about what happens to everyone. It's about the fact that you, sitting in your position of privilege, think you can tell me what my experience has been. You think you can tell me whether or not racism is still a problem in Hollywood. You don't get to do that. You don't have that right. Colbert's hands were shaking a little bit. He took a sip of water from his mug and said, You're absolutely right. I overstepped. I apologize. But Jackson wasn't done. Not even close. You know what really bothers me about this? It's not just that you said these things. It's that you thought you could get away with it. You thought you could talk to me like this because what? Because you're the host? Because you have the power in this situation? Because you think your audience will side with you? That's not fair, Colbert said, and his voice had an edge to it now. I've been nothing but respectful to you. Jackson laughed again, and this time it was louder. Respectful? You call this respectful? You've been talking down to me since the moment I sat in this chair. Every question has been a challenge. Every comment has been a subtle dig. And now you want to act like you're the victim here? The audience started clapping. Not everyone, but enough people that it was noticeable. Colbert looked out at his audience with a confused expression, like he couldn't believe they were siding with his guest over him. He said, I think maybe we should take a break and cool down. I'm perfectly cool, Jackson said. I'm just telling you the truth, and you don't like it. That's not my problem. That's yours. Colbert's face got red again. You could tell his pride was hurt. He said, You know what, Samuel? I think maybe you're being a little too sensitive about this. I was just asking questions. That's literally my job. The audience gasped again, even louder this time. Some people actually booed. Jackson tilted his head to the side and looked at Colbert like he was seeing him for the first time. Did you just call me sensitive? Jackson said slowly. Colbert realized immediately that he had made another huge mistake. He put his hands up. No, that's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, Jackson said. And there it is, the real Stephen Colbert. Not the funny guy who makes jokes about politicians. Not the liberal who pretends to care about social issues. But the real guy who thinks he can tell a black man that he's being too sensitive about racism. That's who you really are. Colbert stood up now too. His voice got louder. That's not who I am at all. You're twisting my words. I'm not twisting anything. Jackson shot back. You said what you said. Everyone heard it. The cameras caught it. You can't take it back now. They were both standing now, facing each other across the desk. The audience didn't know what to do. Some people were filming on their phones. Others just sat there with their mouths open. The band members looked at each other nervously. Colbert said, I think you need to calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. Jackson's voice echoed through the studio. That's the oldest trick in the book. When someone calls you out on your nonsense, you tell them to calm down like they're the problem. I'm not the problem here, Stephen. You are. One of the producers ran onto the stage and tried to whisper something to Colbert, but he waved them away. He was fully committed to this argument now. His ego wouldn't let him back down. Colbert said, Fine, you want to do this? Let's do this. I've had hundreds of guests on this show, and I've never had anyone react like this to a simple conversation. Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's you. The audience booed loudly. Someone yelled, No. Another person shouted, Apologize. Jackson nodded slowly, like everything suddenly made sense. There it is. That's what I've been waiting for. You finally showed everyone who you really are. You can't handle being challenged. You can't handle being told you're wrong. So instead of admitting you messed up, you're doubling down and blaming me. I'm not blaming you for anything, Colbert said, but his voice cracked a little. I'm just saying that maybe you came here with a chip on your shoulder. A chip on my shoulder? Jackson looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Man, I came here to talk about my movie. I came here to have a good time. You're the one who decided to turn this into an interrogation. You're the one who decided to question my career, my experience, and my understanding of racism. All I did was respond to your disrespect. Colbert ran his hand through his hair. He was sweating now, and his face was bright red. Look, I think we both said things we didn't mean. Why don't we just shake hands and start over? Jackson shook his head. No, we're not starting over. We're done here. Come on, Colbert said. And now he was almost pleading. Don't do this. We can work this out. Work what out? Jackson spread his arms wide. You insulted me. You disrespected me. You questioned my experiences with racism. And then when I called you out on it, you called me sensitive. There's nothing to work out. You showed me exactly who you are, and I believe you. The audience started clapping and cheering again. Someone started chanting, Samuel, Samuel! And a few other people joined in. Colbert looked desperate now. He said, If you walk out of here, it's going to look really bad. Jackson laughed. For who? For me. Man, I'm Samuel L. Jackson. I've got nothing to prove to anyone. You're the one who's going to have to explain this to your bosses. You're the one who's going to have to face the audience tomorrow night. I'm going to go home, sleep like a baby, and wake up tomorrow with my dignity intact. Can you say the same? Colbert didn't have an answer for that. He just stood there, looking smaller somehow than he did at the beginning of the show. Jackson turned to the audience and waved. Thank you all for having me. I'm sorry you had to see this, but sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, you know? Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when people don't want you to. You've got to stand up. The audience gave him a standing ovation. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering. Some people were even crying. Jackson nodded to them, buttoned his suit jacket one more time, and started walking toward the exit. Colbert called after him. Samuel, please, don't leave like this. Jackson stopped and turned around one last time. You know what, Stephen? I've been in this business for over 4 decades. I've seen everything. I've dealt with every kind of person you can imagine. And the one thing I've learned is that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they treat you when they think they have the power. Tonight, you showed me exactly who you are. And honestly, I'm disappointed. I expected better from you. I made a mistake, Colbert said, and his voice was shaking now. I'm human. I make mistakes. Making a mistake is one thing, Jackson said. But you made multiple mistakes, and every time I gave you a chance to correct yourself, you made it worse. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. And I don't need to be around people like that. Colbert tried one more time. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? Jackson smiled, but it was a sad smile. Yeah, Stephen. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk away with my head held high, knowing I stood up for myself and for everyone else you've probably disrespected over the years. And you're going to stay here and think about what you did. Maybe you'll learn something from this. Maybe you won't. But either way, I'm done. The audience erupted again. The cheering was so loud you could barely hear anything else. Colbert just stood there, looking defeated. His shoulders slumped, and he put his hands on his desk like he needed it to hold himself up. Jackson gave one final wave to the audience, and then he walked off the stage. The cameras followed him as he went through the backstage area, past the crew members who were all staring at him with wide eyes. Some of them started clapping as he walked by. One woman, who looked like she might be a production assistant, had tears running down her face. She mouthed thank you to him as he passed. Back on the stage, Colbert stood alone at his desk. The audience had stopped cheering and was now just murmuring among themselves. Someone in the front row shouted, "You messed up, man!" Colbert looked out at his audience, and you could see on his face that he knew it was true. He picked up his mug with shaking hands and took a drink. He tried to smile, but it didn't work. His mouth just kind of twitched. He said into his microphone, "Well, that was something. We're going to take a commercial break." But before they could cut to commercial, you could hear Jackson's voice from off stage, talking to someone. "Nah, I'm good. I'm more than good. That needed to happen. Sometimes you have to check people, you know? Can't let them think they can talk to you any kind of way just because they're on TV." The cameras stayed on Colbert's face, and you could see him hear those words. He closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them again, they looked wet. Not quite crying, but close. The show finally cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In the backstage area, Jackson was surrounded by crew members. One of them, an older black man who worked as a stagehand, shook his hand and said, "Man, I've been working here for 5 years, and I've wanted to say something like that 100 times. Thank you for doing it." Jackson nodded. Sometimes you got to speak up. Doesn't matter who it is or where you are. You got to speak your truth. A producer rushed up to him. "Mr. Jackson, please, can we talk about this? Maybe you could come back out and—" "No," Jackson said simply. "I'm leaving. And if I were you, I'd be worried about fixing your host's attitude, not trying to get me back out there." The producer looked like she might cry. "This is going to be a nightmare for us." Jackson's expression softened just a little. "Look, I get it. You're just doing your job. But your job shouldn't be covering up for someone who can't treat his guests with respect. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe it'll make him think twice next time." He walked toward the exit, and crew members parted to let him through. As he pushed open the door to leave, you could hear him say to his assistant who was waiting for him, "Get the car ready. I'm done here. And call my publicist. Tell them I'm going to put out a statement about what happened tonight. People need to know the truth." The door closed behind him, and Samuel L. Jackson was gone. Back on the stage, when the show came back from commercial, Colbert was sitting at his desk alone. His eyes were red, and he looked completely shaken. He tried to make a joke about what happened, but nobody laughed. The rest of the show was awkward and uncomfortable. His next guest, who was supposed to come out and talk about their new album, gave short, uncomfortable answers and left as quickly as possible. But Samuel L. Jackson was already in his car, driving away from the studio, having just walked off one of the biggest talk shows on television, because he refused to let anyone disrespect him, not even Stephen Colbert.